Oh, the humanity. Have you recovered yet from this Grand Prix? From the monotony and the boredom at extremis? It's techie, isn't it? But there are some things more interesting even than the Grand Prix itself. Plot lines that are developing in real time, courtesy of our man on the ground, Ted Kravitz. Of course, we need to talk about Charles. Put some respect on his name, Cameron, everyone, and issue some apologies. Maybe not. Need to talk about F1 marketing using Charles Leclerc as the monegasque. There is something to be said for taking driving superstars, sports superstars, and celebrating them in their home territory. There's something to be said for the FIA and their reset to last saved game philosophy. What is that all about? Nonsense. Of course, we need to talk about Lewis Hamilton and potential Mercedes sabotage. We need to talk about Esteban Ocon. We need to talk about Bruno Famin. We also need to talk about McLaren and their strategy. George Russell too. There is a lot to get to in short order. Plus bloody Jack Doohan and conversations that he's having apparently with the Alpine team principal. This one is going to be chaos, so let's get to it quickly. First and foremost, shout out to Charles Leclerc, delivered, absolutely nailed it, but it was a dodgy Grand Prix, was it not? And that for me takes some of the shine off of what should be the greatest day of Charles Leclerc's racing career. He finally got over the Monaco curse hump and managed to execute at his home Grand Prix. He was superb, has been superb all race weekend. It was a qualifying lap for the pole from the racing gods. Props to Charles Leclerc doing what we all know and have realised for the longest time, that he is capable of being quick from A to B and then executing, delivering in the race without unforced errors. And that last bit is critical now. Although saying that, it was a bit of a weird race. How much did Charles Leclerc really have to deliver? How under pressure was he ever? Because as soon as K-Mag stacks it into Checo Perez and by extension his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, the whole complexion of the race has changed. One stopper, two stopper, there is uncertainty and stakes, but for K-Mag's error at the outset, as soon as that happens, the situation and circumstance is red flagged. All uncertainty and stakes by virtue of strategy taken completely out of the Monaco Grand Prix. K-Mag therefore sucked the life out of it. The 78 laps that we had to endure their run-in were courtesy of K-Mag. We have him to thank for that. There will be conversations at Haas about K-Mag's underperformance. Nico Hülkenberg was not happy. But extending from that, we get effectively a one-stopper, right? And again, you have the tyre offsets. Lewis Hamilton, who we will get to in short order, Max Verstappen too, started on the hards and then went to the mediums, left themselves in a very difficult predicament, did they not? Having to do 76 laps on the softer compound tyre. That's techie, although that being said, George Russell somehow managed to do it now. He managed to extend the life, notwithstanding wanting to push on. These radios, race engineer came on and told him, listen, mate, why are you pushing for? First order priority here, George of Kings Lynn, Norfolk, is to make it through to the end. George Russell disappointed me somewhat at the moment. Was this not the very same circumstance that he experienced last time out at the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix? Not knowing that first order priority is to get to the end on this set of tyres. What are we doing, George? Why are you racing? Make it to the end, chap. You've got 76 laps to do on the softer compound. What are you doing, mate? This is nonsense. Absolute bloody chaos. But I say all that to say I am super happy for Charles Leclerc, as was most of the paddock. Watching the aftermath of the Grand Prix, there was an overwhelming good feeling, a positive sentiment that finally Charles, one of the true good guys, one of the only ones of the 20 currently on the grid, had done something very, very special. He needed that. Just like Lando Norris needed to get his maiden victory, having gone through the travails, Sochi 2021 fresh in the memory. The question was he ever going to win a race even? Similar to Martin Brundle, because most F1 drivers do not. And I think this is there are parallels between Lando Norris's circumstance and Charles Leclerc's now. He needed to get over that hump. And now, apparently, the complexion for the championship has changed altogether. People are talking now about competition for the rest of the season, about potentially challenging one Max Verstappen and the Red Bull. I think for now, though, that might be just a tad far-fetched. A bit too much for now. Tinged by recency bias and confirmation bias. What we want to happen rather than what will happen, or at least the most likely outcome. I think in Canada, we will see a return to form by Max Verstappen in that Red Bull. Although, and this is where it gets techie, chat, and interesting. Because when asked by Natalie Pinkham about a potential return to form, Max Verstappen said something to this effect. Well, I'm not sure. Hopefully we'll be better in Montreal, but the problem remains the same. This RB20 has an issue with curbs. The exact thing that propelled Charles Leclerc to a victory in Monaco this weekend is the reason why the RB20 has a soft, vulnerable underbelly. It cannot take curbs. You guys have heard me a gazillion times by now refer to Ted Kravitz's descriptor. Anti-dive and anti-squat in the RB20. The very thing its success is a function of means that they need to run that suspension stiff. Running that suspension stiff, therefore, means when you take curbs, it is unstable. You are liable to spin. Montreal is a curb riding circuit, so Max Verstappen has a point. But here's the bigger point that Ted Kravitz made, and this, ladies and gents, is where it gets very, very bloody techie. Look at this. Ted Kravitz says, is Max Verstappen not setting himself up to use the iniquities of the car as a scapegoat to propel himself into another car in 2026. Oh, the humanity peddlers. Did Ted Kravitz really say that? Do I need to repeat it for the avoidance of doubt? Ted Kravitz said that potentially Max Verstappen is using the ills and the travails of the car as far as its curb riding. It's difficult to set up, et al., as potentially a scapegoat as to why he might end up at another team as soon as 2026. Oh, the humanity. Did Ted Kravitz really say that? Now listen, all F1 journalists are made equal, but some, they say, are more equal than ever. Ted Kravitz, Teddy Special K, has never done me wrong yet. When he talks about rumour and conjecture, 9 times out of 10, it's the most likely possible outcome that he is referring to. I hadn't seen this coming. I presumed that one Max Verstappen was going to be at Red Bull for the rest of his racing career. But that makes sense, doesn't it? Max Verstappen is talking up the ills and the woes of that RB20. Maybe a little bit too much. Articulating them. You guys saw him this weekend past Max-splaining how difficult it is to drive the RB20 over the contoured and undulating Monte Carlo track. Is he setting something up really? This is chaos visual. I hadn't considered this, but when Teddy Special K, Mr. Kravitz, says something, you better listen, right? Pinkham also continued, asking Max Verstappen about whether the race was boring, and Max doesn't mess about. He doesn't mince his words, does he? That's not in his artillery. Played it back to Pinks and said, listen, didn't you find the race boring? Well, listen, sadly around here, continued Verstappen, you can't do anything if you qualify out of position. There's nothing to be done. The cars aren't fit for purpose. The track isn't fit for purpose for the cars. There is no overtaking. As soon as K-Mag induces the red flag, the race is all but done. What is there to do? And to that point, I concur. Max is absolutely on the money. We saw 76 laps earlier today of procession. And here we didn't give words or rise to the extent of the procession that we saw. These guys were 4 seconds off the pace. Charles Leclerc at the front was incentivized to go slow, of course, for a couple of reasons. A, tyre management. B, you can't pass in Monte Carlo. So what are the guys behind him to do? Where was Oscar Piastri going to put his car? What, dive bomb up the inside of turn 10? Likely story, mate. He tried it. Turn 8 towards the end of the Grand Prix. Tried it. But that circuit can't fit 2 cars deep. It was not F2. This was F1. And what we lacked was spectacle. But it was always going to be that way, especially owing to K-Mag's endeavours and indiscretions at the outset of the Grand Prix. 2, we need to talk about this FI reset to last game nonsense. How comes on the back of K-Mag's accident and bloody Carlos Sainz's puncture, how comes we restart the race and Carlos Sainz is all of a sudden back in third place? What are we doing? What are we doing, FIA? How is this nonsense even a thing in the most popular, that meant to be the greatest motorsport formula in the world? Reset to last save game. Carlos Sainz is out of the race by now. What are we doing? What, just restart again as if nothing ever happened? Why don't you let Checo Perez start in a T car as well whilst we're there? Nico Hulkenberg too. How is that fair? This is nonsense. Again, I don't want to go scorched earth today, but the FIA never fail to seize incompetence from the jaws of competence. What are they doing? This is nonsense. Carlos Sainz, we reset. I'm all of a sudden like, you saw me on the stream confused that Carlos Sainz had DNF'd, but all of a sudden he's back in third. Why? Explain this to us, FIA. Because of Drive to Survivation, there is a new fan base. And listen, they're not going to hang around if, indeed, they can't understand the rules. Somebody explain to me why Carlos Sainz is back in the race again. How and why we can reset to last save game, start over as if it was the first time it was lights up. What are we doing? Come on, FIA. This is nonsense. And this is part of the broader problem that is F1. FIA do not respect the fans. Everything is opaque and lacks transparency. All now, having investigated and done due diligence for you guys, I still cannot explain the rationale behind Carlos Sainz starting the second time around from third position on the grid, the same place that he started the first time around, even though he had a puncture. What are we doing? This is nonsense. Absolutely ridiculous. The race was super boring. I think it's unacceptable. We need to have a big grown person conversation about Monte Carlo, right? It's not fit for purpose anymore, and I think they all agreed. Teddy K on his notebook said that the cars were slower than slow things, 4 seconds off the pace. A member, a fan who was in attendance at Monte Carlo, the Monaco Grand Prix, shouted to Teddy K, "How did you enjoy the race?" Teddy K, tongue very firmly in cheek, responded to said fan by saying, "What race? There was not a race today. We did not have one. There were 2 overtakes the entirety of the 78 laps. What are we doing here, FIA? You're responsible for maintaining the competitive landscape. This shouldn't just be about monetization now. This is about spectacle and enjoyment. F1, as aforementioned, is meant to be evocative, make you feel something at its best for the avoidance of doubt. It's meant to be barbershop talk. You're meant to watch F1 and want to talk to your friends about it. It is meant to be that good at its best. Monaco Grand Prix was none of those things, and I think that's a shame. It's a missed opportunity, jewel in the crown, but they need to change something, right? An effect change is exactly what the FIA do not do at all. They have it in their locker, do they? But I digress. Too techie. Go on, let's talk about Ocon, because Ocon flopped the case, didn't he? Absolutely donkey of the day. It was a dodgy move. Jenson Button said the move in and of itself on his teammate Pierre Gasly wasn't the worst in the world. Indeed, he managed to get a wheel up the inside, but again, he washed out, didn't he? Understeered into his teammate Pierre Gasly and damn near took the both of them out. His race was ended indeed. Pierre Gasly managed to trunter on and get a point for 10th. Fair play, Pierre Gasly. However, there are wider ramifications for one Esteban Ocon, as Bruno Famin, the bloody team principal of Alpine, has said as much in an interview with French TV. Here's what he had to say. We will be having a serious conversation with our charge Esteban Ocon, and there will be consequences. There will be serious consequences for Esteban Ocon. We told him that you do not race each other as teammates, but like a moth to a flame that is Esteban Ocon, he could not help himself. For that, team principal of Alpine, Bruno Famin, said there will be consequences. What do those consequences look like? Teddy K in his notebook speculated that potentially they might sit Esteban Ocon for the next race at the Monaco Grand Prix. That is chaos, but well earned. There needs to be consequences for acting up for Esteban Ocon, because too frequently is this an occurrence now. No longer is he an 18-year-old. He's not a young pup anymore, and he shouldn't be making those mistakes. And here's where it gets techie and also very juicy. Teddy K says he looked up and he could see Bruno Famin, team principal of Alpine, having a conversation with Jack Doohan. What does that mean? Are they going to sub Alpine reserve driver in for Jack Doohan for the Montreal Grand Prix to punish Esteban Ocon for his indiscretions? Is that where we are? I don't even think that's a bad idea, especially when you consider the broader landscape, the long queue of young drivers that are just waiting to get subbed in. You saw Ollie Bearman today pull the up and under up the inside of bloody Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Those two are waiting in the wings. How about Felipe Drugovich? How about Victor Martins? How about Théo Pourchaire? These are winners of F2, some of them, Felipe and Théo Pourchaire. No seat in F1 in sight, yet we're going to indulge Mr. Crash Esteban Ocon. That's not fair and it's not acceptable. And again, F1 needs to have a very serious word with itself now. That's not cricket. We can't be sustaining these also-rans, these crash merchants in Esteban Ocon and bloody Logan Sargent, for Pete's sake. Not when there are potentially great young drivers on the sidelines. Sub them in now, lest their career waste away. Not good enough. And then finally, let's talk about this Lewis Hamilton sabotage business. What are you saying, Leroy? Ocon lost points, that's simple. Yeah, well, he lost points for him bloody self, and he nearly sabotaged his teammates' race as well, didn't he? And therein lies the issue. And that's why I think this punishment, whatever he's got coming down the pipeline, is absolutely apropos warranted. Let's talk about Lewis. I don't know where I stand on this, you know. Right. As far as Lewis's race, here's what happened. He said in the car that he told them that he wanted to start on the softer of the two compounds, wanted to start on mediums, and then if in the case that there was an early safety car, switch across to the hards and do the whole race. They didn't do that. They didn't listen to him yet again. Now look, that ostensibly is true, and I'm not going to debate Lewis Hamilton. He's a truth sayer. I take that as fact. However, I've criticised Charles Leclerc on many occasions for not being assertive enough. If you can see the apex predator of a strategy, then institute for it. Lewis, if you thought that the option was going out on softs or the mediums, the softer of the two compounds, and then ending up on hards, then do that now. They can't send you out on tyres that you don't want. You are Lewis Hamilton, 7-time champion. This is about cachet and assertiveness now. So I don't want to accuse Lewis Carl Davidson of complaining or moaning for the sake of moaning. However, I can't, in the name of consistency, I have to leverage the same criticism at him for assertiveness or lack thereof, as I have done on a gazillion different occasions at Charles Leclerc now, lest I be deemed a hypocrite. Lewis, then why weren't you on the tyres of choice? Did you allow Mercedes, the boys and girls at Brackley and Brixworth, to convince you otherwise? What's the plan here? Especially if already you're very firmly in sabotage mode, because we've heard the comments already. You don't think you'll ever be able to out-qualify George Russell because all of a sudden your pace between free practice and qualifying disappears. With that knowledge in hand then, surely take your own strategic destiny into your own hands then. Be assertive. You are 7-time champion. You understand for these circumstances by virtue of your not insubstantial experience. If you want to go out on mediums, you go out on mediums, Lewis. Nobody can tell you any different. And then you get the compare and contrast between them two Mercedes drivers' races. Because ultimately, George Russell managed to go long, notwithstanding his protestations and wanting to go and drive and race and rinse out the tyres and expedite for their degradation curve. That's what George was on, but they managed to peel him back and he ended up going long. Why couldn't Lewis have done that as an example? Because Lewis ended up in the weeds, ended up getting overcut by one Max Verstappen. Let's talk to that very quickly, because that's another circumstance in and of its own right. Lewis Pitts comes out and gets jumped by one Max Verstappen, which potentially was always going to happen. Max is in the quicker of the two machines. However, I was ever so slightly perturbed by Lewis Hamilton's message over the radio. Lewis said something to this effect: "Bono, why didn't you tell me that those laps were critical?" Hang on. Are we talking about the 7-time champion? That you did not know that an in-lap and an out-lap with Max Verstappen, 3, soon to be 4-time champion, in your wing mirrors? You didn't know that the in and the out laps were going to be critical, that you were going to prioritise as a first order priority tyre management. P8, I'm not having this. I'm calling bull feathers on. This is absolutely ridiculous. That's bonkers. Lewis is better than that, and for me not to call him out is doing the man and the driver an absolute disservice. Can you imagine Fernando Alonso or Carlos Sainz Jr. or a Michael Schumacher or even a Max Verstappen, dare I say it, saying over the radio that they weren't aware that the in-lap and the out-lap were mission critical? I don't know where we're going with this. I genuinely, non-rhetorical statement, I do not understand. This makes no sense. This is Lewis Hamilton, for Pete's sake. 2021 settings. We've seen his highs and his ability to think his way through a race. But yet he, the man from Stevenage, didn't realise that the in and out lap were critical with one Max Verstappen in your rear view. What are we doing? What? This beggars belief now. It's ridiculous now. And again, I've said to you, for the avoidance of doubt, Lewis Hamilton fan massively self-confessed. But what I'm not going to do on this channel is sacrifice objective truth at the altar of any type of partisanship. This makes no sense. And I know that since the team have accepted culpability, they've said, okay, so Bono should have told him. Okay, Bono should have told him that's a nice to have. But I believe that Lewis Hamilton also should have bloody known. In and out lap, Max Verstappen in your wing mirrors. Come on, man. What are we doing? This is bonkers. I just, beggars belief, Jay. I just don't understand. And then Max Verstappen obviously jumps him, and then he's having a nabble at one George Russell for the entire race. Ultimately can't get it done though. Techie. Let me just say finally about Monaco. Here's how you know Monaco was an SH1T show. It can't be a race if the leaders are incentivized to go slow. Back in the day when I used to ride my bikes with my best friends at school, we used to do slow races. We used to try and go down the hill as slow as possible. And that's equivalent to what we saw at Monaco. They were 4 seconds off the pace. When you have drivers trying to do 76 laps on one set of tyres, what else do you think is going to happen? This is why George was being told over the radio, we have nothing to gain from chasing those in front. Your objective, no, your first order priority, George of Kings Lynn, Norfolk, is to go long and keep these tyres fresh. Reduce for their degradation as far as possible by the way that you're driving. You are disincentivized, therefore, to go fast. What we saw, therefore, was not a race. This was a procession, a peloton of sorts. Ted Kravitz tells a story about how the Ferrari drivers were driving deliberately slow to impede Lando Norris behind and send the McLaren driver into the clutches of the Mercedes bods behind him so that he couldn't get a free pit stop. This was a slow race, a procession if ever I've seen one. The drivers indeed were disincentivized to go quick. First order priority for each and every single one of them was maintaining tyres, trying to slow down or reverse the degradation process. The FIA need to look at this. They need to work in conjunction with Pirelli and make sure that this never happens again. I've laid blame at the footsteps of Monaco and Monte Carlo as a track, and that's true. I'm not taking that back. But there are other parties that are culpable in this. Pirelli need to take some blame. FIA need to take some blame. How comes we can red flag and these guys can still change their tyres? What's that about? What are we doing here? This is just nonsense. Rewrite the rules, FIA. What are we doing? Bono said what? Bono didn't say anything is the problem, Steve. Bono didn't say anything at all. And that's why they've ultimately owned up. And Mercedes they've said mea culpa. This was me. They've taken blame, but I'm still not having it. I think Lewis Hamilton, for me not to criticise Lewis for not knowing that he needs to go hammer time on an in and out lap is me doing Lewis a disservice. I'm not going to treat Lewis like he's stupid, because he's not. He's a 7-time champion, one of the goatiest F1 minds that have ever F1. What are we doing? And he's coming over the radio saying you needed to tell me that this was a priority, in and out lap. Nah. So there is a difference, therefore, between sabotaged and Lewis Hamilton letting one slip, right? And that's what I think it was. 2026, there was a proposal for 16-inch tyres. And no visual. That wouldn't be too bad. I don't know how much that would solve for the circumstance that we were all victims of today. But you know what? Maybe it might do something. It is all change. Max Verstappen to another team. I think that's the story out the back of this, you know. Can you imagine if he's just setting up an exit? The car wasn't good enough and that's why I had to join Mercedes. Oh, the humanity. It is all very interesting in the weird and wacky world of F1. But the Monaco Grand Prix, I will say again, for the avoidance of doubt, not to labour the point, but the Monaco Grand Prix wasn't good enough. Anomalous, yes. Jewel in the crown, yes. Spectacular as a spectacle, but as good as it was as a spectacle, all the stars, all the girlfriends, is exactly how bad it was as a race. Ted Kravitz's phrase is absolutely legendary. When asked how he enjoyed the racing, Ted Kravitz responded in kind. What race? Sums it up rather nicely, eh? Oh, the humanity. But I digress.